a woman architect from Turkey. Her educational and professional career indicates many significant thresholds for Turkish and American architecture, and she received many awards in her field. Dr. Aliye Çelik graduated from the Middle East Technical University School of Architecture in Ankara, Turkey in 1967. The Middle East Technical University had academic traditions and pedagogy in architectural education quite distinct from existing schools of architecture in Turkey at that time.
It was and it is one of the best universities in Turkey, and it is within the 100 best universities in the world. And at that time we had an atmosphere of energy, and we thought that we were pioneers in this new university, and we were all trying very hard to make the most of it. It was really an international university, or that is how we felt at that time, because we had professors from all over the world. For example, Professor Geneba was a Bauhaus architect, and he came from Germany and Australia. Most of our teachers had their master's degrees at UPenn or Pratt Institute. And we had other teachers who came from different countries, and we were very aware of what was going on, and our student body was also international. Among the professors who had influence on me was Professor Bilgi Denel and his wife Serim Denel. Also, Gönül Tankut is a woman professor of urban planning. And then, of course, there was Abdullah Kuran. He was also a legend, and Ekmel Derya. So we had wonderful professors who taught us that our work was not limited to Turkey only, but we are going to be ready for an international career.
Dr. Çelik had a strong wish to serve disadvantaged people since the beginning of her architectural education. Human-oriented approach and serviceability have been always at the heart of her training as an architect.
Always I had some different interests, so helping others was one of them. So being an architect, I was wondering how I can help others rather being an instrument of a system which serves the rich and design for the rich. And for that reason, functionality was very important for me. And early on in our education in Middle East University, we went and visited squatter houses and the old houses in Altındağ. And the life I saw there gave me this idea that one can help the poor as an architect.
After receiving her bachelor and master degrees in architecture from the Middle East Technical University, Aliye Çelik applied to Princeton University, traditionally an old boys' school, and she received a Master of Fine Arts in Architecture degree as the first woman architect in 1970.
Well, I never thought that Princeton was an old boys' school, to tell you the truth. I was concentrating on the important architects who were teaching there, like Charles Guattami and Michael Graves and Kenneth Frampton and Anthony Widler. And I have heard a lot about Princeton University from Bilgi Denel. I was very impressed with Professor Geddes, whose principle at Princeton University and later was that fitting is the role of architecture. Architecture and buildings should fit the environment, social atmosphere, and economic atmosphere. They should be in line with the atmosphere around them. So he had a big influence on me. And my thesis professor was Eduardo Lozano, and he was very involved, very interested in squatter housing.
She was awarded the American Institute of Architects Award for Excellence Certificate for Merit in the same year she graduated from Princeton.
Well, I had no idea that I was getting the award while I was at school, because after I finished my thesis and my year, I returned back to Turkey, and out of the blue, one day I received this award in mail, and I didn't know what it was. I was very happy that it was given for my thesis, but it didn't have much impact on me, because at that time I was in Turkey. I was working for the Ministry of Housing and Resettlement. So to tell you the truth, it didn't have much impact at that time. Later on, it played a very important role, because I realized that this was given to me by the Institute of Architects, and now we are working with the Institute of Architects, especially New York Chamber, all the time. So it did have an impact much, much later.
Her husband, Metin Çelik, is also an architect. Husband and wife collaborations in the architecture profession are common. However, Aliye Çelik chose a different career path. She served for the United Nations for a long time.
There were two reasons. One, practical and economical. As you know, architecture is a profession which is very dependent on the economic situation in a country. And when there is a depression, the architects' jobs are lost. First of all, we were trying to avoid that, and I wanted to have a more steady career working for public organizations, while my husband worked for architectural offices. Then he had his own architectural office. The second one was that our interests were different. He loved designing, he loved architecture from day one, and he decided that he will be an architect when he was 10 years old. And I, on the other hand, was not sure till the very end, because I had so many interests. I thought that I might not be only doing design and architectural practice, but I might look at different things as well, which I did, like bioclimatic design and passive solar design and design for the poor, and then urban planning and sustainable urbanization. So that was the reason we had different interests.
Aliye Çelik returned to Turkey in 1971 and received her PhD at Istanbul Technical University in 1976. She conducted research in the field of housing and bioclimatic design in architecture at the Turkish Scientific and Research Council, TÜBİTAK.
That was a period in Ankara when pollution was at its worst level. Ankara in winter was under always huge smoke, and when I started to work in the Building and Research Institute, that was one of the topics that I was dealing with. So I worked in energy conservation and bioclimatic design as well. But through that, we prepared many books, and in fact, I even prepared a TV program in which I was telling everyone how they can heat their houses without using too much fuel. And that became the best seller for the Scientific and Technical Research Council, the Building Research Institute at that time. So I think we created an awareness on that topic. And also the Building Research Institute was very innovative also under the leadership of Professor Tulu Bayten of Istanbul Technical University. And we were looking at topics that were not analyzed or looked at by anywhere else regarding architectural research, both in housing for the poor, housing for the masses, efficient housing, and also energy conservation.
The year 1981 was another significant turning point in her career. Aliye Çelik began to work for United Nations, and among other topics, she concentrated on women's issues. She participated in the Third International Conference on Women organized by the United Nations in Nairobi in 1985.
It was a huge conference which made an impact on women's issues all over the world. The whole concept of women's rights as human rights, that was discussed there, and it was the second conference on women. But what we brought from the UN Habitat side was the relationship between architecture, space, land, and women. These issues were not looked into, and they were considered not to be related to women's issues at all at that time, because women's issues were considered to be, well, the social ones and economic ones, but not related to space issues. And that was really pioneering. At that time, we brought together a number of women who were very interested in these issues, and I wrote on women's role in the construction industry. Of course, at that time, we thought that women had no role in construction industry, but they had. In villages, it is the women who build and the houses. They carry the bricks, but it is the men who put the last touches. So everybody thinks that buildings in villages are constructed by men. No. They are built by women and maintained by women, but and the bricks are usually done by women. So we brought up these issues. Land is a very important part of women's economic issues, especially for poor women. In many countries, when the husband dies, the women are not allowed to inherit their land and their houses, and they are displaced. So this conference was the starting point in which these issues became important. And of course, the role of UN Habitat, which is the arm of United Nations regarding space and urbanization and housing, played a very important role in that too.
In 1987, she was appointed to the New York office of the United Nations Center for Human Settlements, UNCHS. She was one of the organizers of the Second United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, Habitat II, in Istanbul in 1996.
It was a very successful conference from many points. One of the most important points was the role that was taken by the local governments and local authorities at that time. Up to that point, the role of municipalities, the elected officials of municipalities in urban settlements in cities was not emphasized. It was the first time they and other partners and stakeholders in the issues came to the conference. There were women's groups, there were private sector representatives, NGOs, academicians, which came to the conference and were heard, where they were all heard about what they think about urbanization, how to plan urbanization, urban areas, and the result was the Istanbul Declaration and the Habitat 2 agenda, which is a blueprint of how to design and plan cities. The first conference was held with the belief that, oh, people are moving to cities. What shall we do? I mean, there are too many squatters. But by the second conference, the solution was seen to be not only by governments, but all the stakeholders. There was a decision that they should all be involved. So that was the conference, and I think it was very important from the perspective of UN conferences, UN history, and also a history of urban planning and design.
In 1997, Aliye Çelik spearheaded the conference, Crosstown 116, bringing Habitat 2 home from Istanbul to Harlem, in collaboration with Professor Robert Giddes, her former dean from Princeton University School of Architecture. For her outstanding contribution to this project, she was recognized by the American Institute of Architects New York chapter.
Up to now, we never mentioned United States because my work at the United Nations was dealing with basically developing countries, not developed countries. That is how the United Nations work. But of course, in being stationed in New York, we were very much aware of the problems in developed countries as well. There are some parts of United States which have exactly the same problems as developing countries regarding housing and settlements and squatters and tenements. And so we were looking at these issues. And for example, once we had a meeting about women's rights to housing in Camden, which has similar problems to developing countries. And this time around, we collaborated with Professor Geddes. First, we organized a meeting, and then this project came, and this project was significant for the United States because it was the first time the Housing and Urban Development Authority, which is HUD, worked together with American Institute for Architects and a university, which was the City University of New York, and UN Habitat to have a project in Harlem. That is why Crosstown 116 is the 116th Street, very close to Columbia University. It was a very interesting project, and there was Professor Geddes brought a wonderful team in which we worked together, and that was the reason I got this citation.
In 2000, she became the Chief of Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and Interorganizational Cooperation Branch at the United Nations, and retired in 2005. She is still active in her architectural career.
When I was working at the Economic and Social Council, I have to tell you that nobody knew about ECOSOC or Economic and Social Council. But United Nations have two parts. One is related to development, especially in developing countries, and the other one on security. And Security Council deals with security, and ECOSOC deals with development. And well, Economic and Social Council works in many areas. And in 2000, it accepted the Millennium Development Goals, looking into ways of developing countries. And in developing countries, sustainability is very important. Sustainability can be in three areas. That is the economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. And of course, coming from the background of architecture and urbanization, I started to think about sustainable urbanization. It is a topic that everybody knows about, and everybody knows how important it is, but nobody talks about it, or nobody is trying to do something about it besides, of course, UN Habitat. But UN Habitat is based in Nairobi. So this issue would come to New York headquarters, once during the General Assembly, and once during the World Habitat Day. So we used to organize something for World Habitat Day, and we would follow what is going on at the, United Nations General Assembly would discuss it once a year. And while I was working at UN Habitat and later even at ECOSOC, that more attention is paid by delegations. After I retired, I thought it might be a good idea to bring the members of American Institute of Architects and the professionals here, academicians and practitioners, together with delegations. And it was a great combination. We established this non-governmental organization, which is the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. And we think that we are doing a good job of talking about these issues and informing the architects in New York about what is going on all over the world and at the United Nations. And there is a lot going on at both places, and vice versa, what is going on in the United States to the delegations at the UN.
Aliye Çelik was the head of New York office and later senior advisor at UN Habitat. The next United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3, will take place in Ecuador in October 2016.
Well, another 20 years passed, and the problems of urban areas did not diminish, did not get lost. The number of squatter houses in all major developing countries, cities, increased tremendously. In some cities, there's 40, up to 60% of the city population lives in squatter housing. And the biggest problem is that it is seen by many that the cities grow by themselves. No, they don't grow by themselves. They need to be planned. They need to be designed, to be maintained. And the city, the policies for cities have to be very advanced. Also, there is the big impact of computers, information technology in running the cities and making them more efficient. So there are many factors, and the poverty issues. For example, there are now, the world is 7 billion people, and more than 3.5 billion people live in cities. But in the next 35 years, that figure will increase tremendously by another 3.5 billion people. Well, in order to bring this amount of people to the world, to the cities, we had 4,000 years. But the same thing will happen in the next coming next 40 years. So that means that we have to start working on this immediately. Where will these people live? What sort of a life they will have? What will be the quality of life that they will have? I mean, you can see even in traveling here in New York, the traffic is very difficult. And it takes 1 hour from coming to the west side to the east side. So what will happen in countries like Thailand, in Kenya? So, I mean, there are very many questions and problems that need to be solved. We are hoping that the conference in Quito, which will take place in October of 2016, and the preparatory conference to that, which will take place in Surabaya in Indonesia, will try to bring people together to work on these issues, because these issues do not belong to architects and engineers and planners and local authorities only, but it belongs to everyone. And we as citizens also have many responsibilities, and we are hoping to bring awareness to these issues, and I am grateful to you for doing that. Thank you.
With almost 50 years of experience, Dr. Aliye Çelik has become an advocate for educating and promoting women leaders in their fields, particularly in architecture.
In order for a country to be developed, they have to rely on women as much as men. So all women should be educated and they should contribute to achieve this. And I feel that there is no difference between men and women in leadership positions. There shouldn't be, but there is as you know, there's a glass ceiling, and it has been very difficult to break this glass ceiling in every country, I would say, from west to east. That is a big problem, and I hope that this will get better. For example, we know that women are very successful as architects, but usually when we look at the offices and architectural businesses, women usually work, but they are not the leaders. They do not get to the top positions as easily as men do. First of all, there are usually less women, and even if they are equal in numbers, they don't go as far as men do, and there are many reasons for that. And one of the reasons is that there isn't enough support for women professionals in terms of daycares and taking care of the children, and also the society sometimes does not allow that. But I have to finish with an anecdote, if you permit me. When I went to the preparatory meeting for Habitat 2 conference in Geneva, I think this must have been 1995, it was announced by UN Habitat that they want to have women delegates as much as men delegates. But a few of the countries, they raised their hands and they said, sorry, we don't have too many women architects, so we couldn't bring any women delegations. And the Turkish delegate raised his hand and he said, sorry, we don't have enough men architects. We have more women in our delegation than men. And that was a lovely moment.